Turn off the lights. Let the darkness flood your room as if the winter sky is drawing its curtain over the world. Let the blanket you're under embrace your body, like the animal hides that once wrapped around the poor peasants in a small medieval village. Listen to your own breathing, and try to imagine that same breath is also turning into white mist in a drafty house, somewhere in the year 1325. Winter, in the Middle Ages, was not simply a part of the four-season cycle. It was like a stern examiner, returning each year to test the endurance of the impoverished peasants. There were no storehouses full of food, no warm coats bought from a shop, no gas or electric heating systems as we know them. There, winter was a months-long battle where breath turned to white smoke, where each night survived was a silent victory. Try closing your eyes. You are standing at the edge of a small village in the year 1325. The ground is frozen, and the wind shrieks across the barren fields. The green of the barley is gone, leaving only gaunt stalks trembling in the wind. In the sky, darkness arrives early and stays longer, as if the sun itself is reluctant to visit this harsh land. In the distance, gray smoke rises from dilapidated thatched roofs, painting blurry lines in the frigid air. With every step, you hear the crunch of snow underfoot. Your hands are so numb, you just want to shove them deep into anything that is still warm. You pull a thick but worn woolen cloak tighter around you. It's not enough to stop the wind, but it's better than nothing. All around, tiny houses appear, cracked earthen walls, thatched roofs sagging from snow and rain, doorways so low you have to stoop to enter. Inside the house, the fight against the cold is even more fierce. There are no clear glass windows, only a piece of animal hide pulled across to block the wind. The earthen walls are so thin, it feels as if a strong punch could go right through them. With every gust of wind, every crack and crevice hums as the draft seeps through, cutting straight to the skin. The peasants didn't call it a home, but rather a temporary shell against the winter. And even inside, they could feel the cold creeping up from the ground, seeping into their feet and settling deep in their bones. The medieval winter was a season of lack. A lack of light, a lack of food, a lack of warm clothes, a lack of even a moment's peace. But amidst this scarcity, people clung to life with everything they had. A pile of rotting straw underfoot, a small flickering fire, a thick stew of root vegetables left over from autumn. And above all, they had each other. Families huddled together in the cramped house, turning their breath and body heat into weapons against the winter. You can imagine, sleep, something we take for granted today, was then an art of survival. Sleep wasn't just rest. It was a delicate dance between cold, hunger, and hope. The peasants knew that if they didn't keep the fire going, didn't block the wind, or didn't arrange their bodies just right, the morning might not come for everyone. Outside, the snow continues to fall. Each snowflake landing on the thatched roof creates a faint sound, like a slow, rhythmic tap, marking the passage of time. Inside the mud and straw house, the fire crackles, smoke seeping through the roof, staining it with dark, splotchy marks. The adults sit closely together, warming their hands while telling stories to the children, to make them forget the howling wind outside. In the dim light, every face is gaunt, but their eyes are still bright, bright with the belief that they will get through this together. A medieval night was not peaceful. It was a series of trials. from the cold radiating from the earthen floor to the sudden noises of mice, squirrels, or even a sparrow falling into the stew pot. But it was in these long nights that human resilience was forged. When you think of the medieval winter, remember this: they didn't just survive, they created tricks, rituals, and habits that may seem strange to us today, but to them, it was wisdom passed down through generations. And tonight, I will take you there, not to a magnificent castle or a nobleman's feast, but to a small village nestled in the frozen winter of medieval Europe, to a place where every breath is a testament to resilience, where every flame, every potato, every drop of water determined survival. Close your eyes, breathe slower, and let your imagination carry you through time. We will step into the mud and straw house, sit by the smoky hearth, listen to the whimpering of children, and feel the cold squeezing your chest. This is not just a history lesson. It is a journey for you to see that sleep, even in poverty and freezing cold, was still the last place where people could find a sliver of peace. That journey begins as you lower your head and step through the low doorway. The rough wooden door closes with a simple crossbar. There is no creak of metal hinges, just a soft thud, and then darkness embraces you. Inside, it's darker than you imagined. The only light comes from the flickering fire in the center of the room. It casts dancing shadows on the cracked walls, splotched with mud and straw. This is no luxurious dwelling. It is just a thin shell, enough to stand against the winter lurking outside. The house was built using a method the medieval people called wattle and daub. First, they wove young saplings into a frame, like a coarse lattice. Then they plastered it with a mixture of mud, straw, and sometimes animal dung for binding. When it dried, it formed a wall that could keep out the rain, but rarely the wind. With a strong gust, the crevices would whistle. A low hum, like the long sigh of a house straining to endure. Try reaching out to touch it, cold, damp, as if the earth from outside is seeping straight into your bones. Small cracks run along the surface. Near the bottom, the mud has crumbled from the damp, revealing a few brittle straws. If it wasn't patched in time, a whole section of the wall could peel off after a single strong wind. The people called this winter patching. The whole family would use their bare hands to plaster more mud, more dung, stuffing moss and rags into the gaps, hoping to keep just a little warmth inside. The window, if you could call it that, is just a small square opening. It's covered with a piece of animal hide, stiffened by frost and wind. It doesn't let light in, only blocks some of the draft. When the wind blows hard, the hide shivers, making a flapping sound. Children startle awake. Outside, the night is pitch black. Inside, the darkness is thick. A place where people can only cling to the light of the fire. But the roof was the real betrayer. It was thatched with straw and reeds, tightly bundled in layers. It looked thick, but when it rained or the snow melted, water would drip through. Plink, plonk, into the stew pot, onto the dry straw. Sometimes the family would be eating when a squirrel would fall straight down from the thatch. Dinner would suddenly become a scene half comic, half tragic. Stories like these were often retold, like a bitter comedy to forget the truth. The house was never completely safe, and even the earthen floor became an enemy. When winter came, the ground froze from below. That cold wasn't just on the surface, it seeped relentlessly into every toe. People spread straw and reeds to insulate it, but after a few weeks, the straw would become moldy, flatten, and turn into a breeding ground for fleas. As you walk across it, you hear a rustling sound. You smell the damp, musty odor. An itchy feeling crawls up from between your toes. Sleeping in the mud and straw house was never restful. It was like participating in a dance against freezing. You had to manage. You had to pull the blanket, add more straw, even huddle close together to find warmth. Every gust of wind outside, every small crack in the wall, was a reminder that the cold never left. Yet this was still home, though cramped, though black with soot, though mud fell in chunks. This place was still filled with the soft laughter of children, the sound of a mother whispering a lullaby, the sound of a father wedging another piece of wood against the door. Within these fragile walls, people found connection, a roof that brought them together as one, a spiritual shield against the harsh winter. And right in the middle of that house, the fire was burning. Not in a grand fireplace with a tall chimney, just a fire pit set in the middle of the room. Smoke seeped through the thatched roof, through the cracks in the walls, covering everything in a black film. But it was the very heartbeat of the house, the heart that illuminated and warmed an entire medieval winter. In the middle of that earthen house, there was a fire. It wasn't in a brick fireplace, nor did it have a tall chimney to lead the smoke outside. It was just a pile of burning wood placed right on the earthen floor, propped up on a few rough stones. That fire was the heart of the entire house. Without it, the room would be plunged into an icy cold. The smoke rose with no escape route. It seeped through the thatched roof and the cracks in the walls. Some of it lingered in the air, enveloping everyone. Eyes stung, throats were raw, clothes were so permeated with the smell of smoke they could never be washed clean. But the peasants accepted it, because the smoke had its benefits. The smoke helped to repel insects. Fleas, mosquitoes, flies, the disruptors of sleep were all afraid of the smoke. In this confined space, a thin layer of smoke acted like a protective veil, keeping the family a little more at peace. Try to sit down right next to that fire. Listen to the crackle of the wood. Watch the flickering yellow light cast upon gaunt faces. The fire was not just warmth, it was the only lamp. When the sun had set in the afternoon and the world outside was pitch black, this fire was the miniature daylight of the entire house. In the evening, the adults sat in a circle around the fire. They warmed their hands and the cracked soles of their feet. Stories were told, legends, myths, or tales of last year's harvest were recounted. For the children, the fire was like the first television, a place where they listened, saw, and learned to remember. Amidst the crackling flames, human voices mingled with the smoke, creating a steady melody that lulled them to sleep. The fire was also the kitchen. Above it, a stew pot hung from a chain or was propped at an angle on stones. The food was simple: a few turnips, some beans, a little leftover fat. The water bubbled. Steam from the pot rose, spreading throughout the room. When it was below freezing outside, a bowl of hot stew was salvation. And the fire was also a test of patience, because keeping a fire alive through the night was not easy. Firewood was scarce. Coals were as precious as gold. They couldn't let the fire go out. Instead of letting it blaze, they buried the hot embers in a thick layer of ash, an ancient technique. That way, the next morning, they only needed to stir it, and the fire would come back to life. Every night, someone had to watch the fire. The adults took turns. Sometimes even the older children had to stay awake. They sat beside it, poking the ashes with a stick, making sure the embers were still smoldering. The cold outside was waiting to rush in. If the fire died, the entire family could freeze to death before dawn. Imagine, you are nodding off by the hearth, your eyelids are heavy, your breathing is wheezy from the smoke, but your hand still holds the poker. Just as you drift off, you jolt awake. Because you know, you cannot fall completely asleep. To keep the fire was to keep life. The fire also served to unite. The whole family gathered around it, shoulder to shoulder. Small children curled up in their mothers' laps. The elderly leaned on their children and grandchildren. The firelight reflected in their tired eyes. In that moment, there was nothing but a silent bond. The fire didn't just burn wood. It kindled the feeling that we are still here together. Smoke, warmth, light, and even fear, all blended into a unique flavor of winter. If you lived in the 21st century, you might find a smoke-filled room unpleasant. But to them, it was the smell of life. Better to breathe smoke than the penetrating cold. Each night, when the whole village was asleep, the fires in each house still flickered, like tiny bright spots scattered across the frozen fields. From a distance, it looked like a starry sky had fallen to earth. Each spot of light was a family, a breath, a story fighting to continue. That fire was a legacy passed down. The older generation taught the younger how to bury embers, how to stack wood, how to shield the flame. These secrets weren't written in books, but lived in chapped hands and smoke-reddened eyes. And so, through countless winters, this small fire kept so many generations of peasants alive. Take another look. The fire dances in the draft, ash floats in the air, the wood crackles. It all merges into a somber, lulling tune. If you let yourself sink into it, you'll feel your heartbeat slow, your breath deepen, just like the peasants who sat here centuries ago, finding a fragile sleep right by the fire. But the fire, however important, was not enough to fight off an entire winter. The most powerful weapon the peasants had was each other's bodies. As night fell, after the last bowl of stew was eaten, when the embers were buried in ash, the whole family began to prepare for sleep. Not the private, quiet sleep we know today, but a communal ritual, crowded, leaning on one another. They called it human lasagna, like layers stacked together, pressed close to form a living blanket. On the outermost layer were the strongest. They lay on their sides, their backs to the cold walls. Their backs where the wind break. Inside, better protected, were the children, the frail elderly, those who needed shelter. And in the very middle was the warmest place. You can imagine a baby nestled in its mother's arms, with an old woman hunched behind her, and beyond them the father and older brother, layers of people, of arms, of breath intertwined, to keep everyone warm. In that space, sounds became unusual. There was heavy snoring, the ragged breathing of the old, the soft whimpering of a small child, quickly soothed in warm arms. It all blended into a fragile music of life. Sometimes a single stir would shift the entire layer. If someone turned, the person next to them had to turn too. The whole mass of people would roll as one, making everyone chuckle in the darkness. A tiny bit of fun, but enough to forget the gripping cold. Communal sleep was also about connection. In the thick darkness, the breath of a loved one was the safest blanket. The smell of hair, of skin, of sweat was all familiar. No one complained because it was the smell of existence. Children grew up with that smell. The elderly fell asleep peacefully in that smell. And every morning when the faint sun rose, the whole family would wake up, knowing they had made it through another night. Some nights the family would joke, "Tonight, who gets to be the filling in the lasagna?" The words were half joking, half serious, but they encapsulated a whole survival strategy. Because whoever was in the middle would be the warmest, the safest, and to achieve that, those on the outside had to sacrifice, bearing the bone-chilling cold at the edge of the straw bed. If you tried to put yourself there, you would feel your body tense from the cold, but gradually, the warmth from the person next to you would spread. At first, just a small patch where shoulders touched, then it would spread, covering your whole body. And as your eyes closed, you would understand. This sleep was not yours alone, but the shared sleep of the entire family. Communal sleep also had its discipline. People learned to be quiet, not to disturb, not to move too much, because everyone was tired and needed rest. It wasn't a written rule, but a silent agreement, a strange rhythm, breaths gradually slowing down together like an unworded choir. In poor villages, sometimes a family of 10 would squeeze onto a single layer of straw. Outside, the wind howled through the roof. Inside, they held each other tight. And strangely, amidst the tightness, the biting cold, there was an odd sense of peace, because in that moment, people saw most clearly that they were not alone. Sleeping like human lasagna wasn't just a trick to stay warm. It was a symbol, a testament to the power of unity, a silent message to the winters to come, that in the longest darkness, the only warmth we have is each other. And as the flickering firelight illuminated the piled-up faces, you could see every yawn, every wheeze was a small note in the symphony of survival. The warmth of humans was then amplified by other companions. It wasn't just people, but also animals, cows, goats, pigs, chickens, who also found a place to sleep in this house. They unintentionally became living heaters, helping to warm the endless winter. In the cramped earthen house beside them were other guests, the familiar animals of a medieval village. Cows, goats, pigs, chickens, sometimes even dogs and cats, all found a place in the small home. Not out of excessive affection, but for survival. Each animal brought its body heat. One more creature in the room meant a few more degrees of warmth for the whole family. To the peasant, an animal was a precious asset. But in winter, they were also living heaters, mobile, silent sources of heat against the cold. Try sitting down and listening to the sounds of the night. Besides the crackling of firewood, you hear the steady huffing of a cow, like a slow drumbeat. You hear a goat shifting, its hooves clattering on the earthen floor. You hear the soft clucking of chickens, sometimes startled by a draft. It all blends into a strange orchestra, the chaotic but familiar symphony of a peasant's home. The smell changes too. No longer just the smell of smoke and musty straw. Now there's the smell of manure, milk, and damp animal fur. To us today, it would be unpleasant, but to the medieval peasant, it was the normal scent of life. That smell was tied to warmth, to meals, to existence. The family arranged sleeping spots carefully. the cow was often given the VIP seat closest to the fire, not just because it was large and radiated a lot of heat, but because the cow was the biggest asset. A healthy cow could determine the family's survival in the next farming season. Goats lay nearby, pigs squeezed into a corner, and chickens flew up to the wooden beams above, huddling together to escape the cold. Sometimes a sleeping child would rest their head on the belly of a young calf. The child's small chest would rise and fall in time with the animal's warm breath. A simple scene, but it became a natural blanket, helping the child get through the long winter night. Of course, living together also led to accidents. Some nights, a chicken, panicked by the wind, would fly frantically in the dark. Sometimes a pig would knock over the stew pot, spilling the entire dinner. Or a goat would kick hard, scattering the pile of straw. The family would let out a soft laugh but would patiently tidy up, because they knew, despite the nuisance, these creatures were indispensable allies. Sleeping amidst the noise of animals was also part of life. You'd hear the distant lowing of a cow, the sudden clucking of a chicken, the soft howl of a dog, hearing a wolf's cry from the fields. Each sound was a reminder that nature was always close by. And this house, however dirty, however cramped, was the only fortress against the cold, dark night. The animals also shared the meager food. The family saved straw, dry leaves, and turnips for the cows and goats. In return, they gave off heat, a silent, primitive agreement, but one that endured for generations. During the night, when everyone was asleep in layers, the breathing of the animals mingled with the breathing of the humans, a steady, soothing rhythm. You can imagine the warmth radiating, spreading throughout the room, making the cold outside seem to retreat a little. If you are listening, try to close your eyes. Imagine yourself lying in that room. On one side, a family member, on the other, a sleeping goat. The smell of smoke, straw, and livestock mingles. Your eyes sting, your nose is raw, but your body is a little warmer. And in that moment, you understand. In the Middle Ages, survival depended not just on fire, but on the warmth from every living being around you. When dawn came, white frost clung to the thatched roof. Inside, both people and animals woke up. The cow shook its head, the goat bleated, the chicken flapped its wings, ready to crow. People stretched, rubbed their hands, shaking off the cold night. They all began a new day, the cycle continuing, with the fragile hope that they would survive many more nights. Sleeping with animals was not a luxury, it was a fact, a survival strategy forced by the harsh cold. And over the centuries, it became a shared memory of European peasant villages, memories of long nights where warmth did not distinguish between man or beast. From that living warmth, the story leads us to another aspect, how people turned their own bodies into armor against the winter, a kind of survival fashion. After the warmth of the fire, after the warmth from human and animal bodies, the people of the Middle Ages had another layer of armor, clothes. But the clothes here were not the flowing silk gowns of the nobility, not the luxurious fur-lined leather coats of knights. For the peasant, the only fashion was to wear everything you had. You can imagine a man stepping out into the winter wind. He is wearing multiple layers of patched-up woolen garments. The bottom layer is the roughest, sometimes just scratchy burlap. On top of that is a thicker layer of wool, worn thin from year after year of use. On the very outside, if he's lucky, is an old cloak inherited from his father or grandfather. There was no concept of regular washing. Wet fabric would only make one colder, so clothes were worn continuously throughout the winter. Sweat, dirt, and oil from the skin seeped into every fiber. This layer of grime, unintentionally, became a natural insulator. They jokingly called it the grease coat, free but warmer than new cloth. Children, having fewer clothes, often wore the oversized garments of their older siblings. The sleeves were longer than their small arms, dragging on the ground. But this very bagginess helped to cover their bodies completely, blocking the draft. A small child would snuggle inside an older brother's shirt, like a fledgling in its nest. On their feet, there were no fur-lined leather boots, only wooden clogs or rough leather shoes, stuffed with dry straw for padding. When they walked, the clatter of the clogs echoed on the frozen ground, like a small drum beating to the rhythm of winter. Often, the straw in the shoes would rot and need to be replaced constantly, but it was still better than bare skin touching the cold earth. Women wrapped more scarves around their heads and necks. Thin pieces of wool, often patched so many times, their original color was unrecognizable. But just one wrap of a scarf made their breath feel warmer, their necks less stiff, and in the flickering firelight, these scarves became protective veils, gently cradling their gaunt faces. Try to imagine putting on all those layers yourself. Tight, heavy, itchy. But when the wind rushes through a crack in the wall, you know that each layer of fabric is holding on to a little more warmth for you. One more chance to survive. They also had their own tricks. Some peasants would rub animal fat on their hands and faces. The smell was unpleasant, but the fat created a barrier, preventing the wind from sucking all the warmth from their skin. Playful children would sometimes smear their faces with ashes from the hearth, partly for fun, and partly to prevent their skin from cracking. These tricks were crude, but they were passed down from one generation to the next. At night, when the whole family lay piled on top of each other like human lasagna, these layers of clothing not only kept each person warm, but also helped the entire group retain heat for longer. Wool rubbed against wool, the fibers trapping heat from skin, from the fire, from breath. The winter clothes of the Middle Ages were not beautiful, not bright, not fragrant, but every layer, every piece of fabric was a testament to resilience. They turned poverty into armor. They turned the little they had into a fortress against the cold. If you listen very carefully, you will hear the rustle of fabric as the family shifts, the clatter of wooden clogs as someone gets up to add wood to the fire, the scrape of a woolen scarf against skin, trapping a little warm breath. These small sounds gathered together are the melody of winter, a melody in which both people and their clothes participated. And from those patched up layers of clothing, the story will lead you to the simple bed, bundles of straw, reeds, and herbs, the place where people lay down, hoping to find a little peace in their sleep, amidst the ceaseless howling of the medieval winter night. After the patched up layers of clothing, people needed a place to lay their heads, a place to rest, however temporary. That was the straw bed, the eco-mattress of the medieval peasant. Imagine, a corner of the room is cleared. On the packed earth floor, they spread a layer of straw, reeds, and sometimes even dry leaves. There were no springs, no fabric covers, just a pile of straw gathered together and loosely tied with cord. Lying down, you would hear a rustling sound against your back and smell the musty scent. At first, the new dry straw smelled fresh, but after just a few weeks, it would begin to mold. Dampness would seep in. The straw would flatten, becoming hard and lumpy. This crude mattress would gradually become a home for fleas, lice, and countless other tiny insects. To cover the smell, people would sprinkle dried herbs, rosemary, wild lavender, mint leaves. A light fragrance would spread through the room, masking the smell of mold, manure, and smoke. In the darkness, that scent lulled people into finding a fragile peace. The straw bed was not durable. Every season, it had to be replaced. The old straw was gathered up, burned, or thrown to the livestock. New straw was laid down, bringing with it the hope of a few more weeks of comfortable sleep. A constant cycle, just like life itself. But a bed alone was not enough. The mud and straw house was full of gaps. Wind seeped in from the roof, from the walls, from the door. To fight back, the whole family had to seal the wind with anything they could find. They stuffed moss into wooden cracks, wedged rags into gaps in the walls, used straw, dry leaves, even animal fur to fill the small openings. Every winter, chapped hands would diligently plaster more mud, more mixed dung, as if patching a giant torn coat. When the wind whistled through the roof, you could hear a low hum, but thanks to the layers of moss, mud, and stuffed straw, the wind softened, becoming just a whisper. In the cramped house, everyone would breathe a sigh of relief, and then sink back into a fitful sleep. Imagine, you are lying on the dry straw, listening to the rustling of insects beneath you. The faint scent of herbs mingles with the smell of the cooking fire. Nearby, the crack under the door has been sealed, no longer letting in a direct draft. Your eyes sting, your back aches, but your body is a little warmer, and in the steady breathing of your whole family, you feel less alone. The straw bed, the sealed cracks, the glowing red hearth, all were just crude pieces. But when put together, they created a fragile wall against the winter. A small fortress, built of mud, straw, and calloused hands. The night was still long. The wind outside had not stopped. But in this damp room, people had a place to lie down, a roof to cling to, and a belief that they would wake up the next morning. And when everything was quiet, the story leads us to another rhythm of life, where not everyone could sleep through the night, as some had to take turns watching, keeping the fire, and preserving life in the silent shifts of the winter's night. The winter night was never truly quiet. Even when the whole family was lying on the straw bed, some eyes had to stay open, because the fire, that fragile heart, could never be allowed to go out. Sleep in the Middle Ages wasn't always a full night's rest. It was more like a watch, divided into shifts. The adults took turns sitting by the fire. When one dozed off, another had to wake up. Even the older children had to learn, had to know how to poke the ashes with a stick, how to add a branch at just the right moment. Try to imagine the whole family has sunk into a fitful sleep. In the thick darkness, only one person sits by the hearth. Eyes are heavy, stinging from the smoke. A trembling hand pushes aside the layer of ash, revealing the glowing embers beneath. If they were careless, the fire would die. And if the fire died, the whole family would shiver in the cold until they were exhausted. So sleep here was always half awake, half asleep. Some would nod off while sitting. Some would drift in a daze, their ears still listening to the wind, the fire, the stirring of an animal. To sleep like this was also a way to survive. Besides watching the fire, there was another technique: survival breathing. In the skin-cutting cold, each deep breath could make the lungs ache. People learned to take short, slow breaths through the nose, inhaling less, but keeping the warmth inside the body. Many would wrap a scarf around their mouth and nose when they slept, not to cover themselves, but so that their breath, passing through the cloth, would retain a little warmth. The exhaled breath was warm. The inhaled breath was less cold. A tiny cycle, but enough to sustain life. Try to picture it. In the darkness, figures lie piled on top of each other. Each one's face is covered with a piece of rough cloth, their steady breaths escaping, dampening a corner of the fabric. That breathing sounds like a murmuring wind, blending into the vague music of the winter night. Tending the fire, breathing slowly, covering the face. These were skills taught from one generation to the next. No books recorded them, only a mother's hand placing a scarf on her child, a father's words of caution before bed. The winter night thus became a lesson in discipline, in patience, and in sharing. Because no one could sleep through the night, no one could keep the fire alone. The whole family, the whole community had to share the shifts, had to maintain their rhythm of breath to get through the endless night. If you listen very carefully, you will hear that rhythm. The rhythm of wood falling into the fire, the rhythm of ash being pushed aside, the rhythm of shallow, slow breaths mingling with the warmth from a covered face. A steady tune lulling the listener into a state between dream and reality. And from those silent shifts, from those fragile breaths, people found yet another way to fight the cold, eating before sleep, so their bodies would become a smoldering furnace in the harsh winter night. In the medieval winter, food was not just for sustenance. It was also a way to generate warmth from within. A bowl of hot stew, a rare bit of fat, a handful of cooked grains, all were weapons against the freezing cold. In the evening before bed, the whole family would sit around the stew pot. The pot was placed right on the fire, the glowing red embers casting light on everyone's gaunt faces. The meal was nothing fancy, just a few turnips left over from the harvest, a few dried beans, a few slices of salted meat, if they were lucky, and most importantly, fat. The rare fat was saved, melted in the pot, floating in small, shimmering slicks like tiny golden islands. They ate slowly, very slowly. Each spoonful brought to the mouth was a moment of warmth. The hot stew burned the tongue, flowed down the throat, and spread throughout the body. That warmth wasn't just taste, it was life being revived. Eating before sleep was a strategy. A full stomach generates heat. The warmth would spread slowly, lasting through the night. The children were prioritized, then the elderly. The stronger ones might eat less, giving their share to the weaker. It was a way for the whole family to get through a cold night together. Besides the stew pot, there were other tricks. People used a hay box. It was a wooden chest lined with dry straw. A hot pot of stew would be taken off the fire, placed in the box, and covered with more straw. The straw would retain the heat, keeping the pot simmering for hours. This simple method saved firewood, but still kept the food hot when needed. And then there were the hot stones. People would throw stones into the fire, letting them absorb the heat. Then they would wrap the stones in rags and tuck them under the straw beds or place them next to small children. When they lay down, their bodies would feel the heat spreading from the stones like a crude heating pad. After a few hours, the stones would cool, but it was enough to trick the cold of midnight. Try to imagine, after eating, your stomach is still warm. You lie down, and next to your feet is a stone wrapped in a rag, still hot. The warmth from the stone, from the stew, from the fire, from your breath, all merge into an invisible cloak. In the bone-chilling cold of the winter night, these small pieces became a great comfort. Eating was also a moment of bonding. While the wind howled outside, inside, the family whispered to each other around the stew pot. The clink of a spoon against the pot. A child asking for more vegetables. A mother coaxing, giving her portion to her child. These simple sounds became the background music of a family fighting to survive. When the last bowl was empty, when the stew pot had only a black scorch mark at the bottom, everyone lay down with a little more peace of mind, because they knew, with full stomachs and warm bodies, they had a better chance of surviving until dawn. And so eating was not just living. Eating was fighting the winter. Eating was keeping the fire inside the body when the fire in the middle of the room grew weak. From those simple meals, the story leads us to another aspect of sleep, the sleeping positions around the hearth, where who got to be close, who was sheltered, determined who would be warm, who would be cold, and who would have the chance to see the next day's sun. The fire flickered, the embers still glowed red. The whole cramped room was filled with smoke, breath, and the smell of damp straw. But here, in this very huddle, something was more important than any fire, the sleeping position. Because not everyone got to lie in the warm spot. And not every place in the earthen house was the same. Closest to the fire was the safest place, where the heat radiated directly onto the skin, where small children could sleep without shivering constantly. Newborns, the weakest, were often placed right by the hearth in their mother's arms. The elderly, the sick, were also placed nearby. The fire's heat soothed their weary bones, keeping them breathing until morning. A little further away, where the heat was less intense, was the place for the healthy adults. They lay on the outside, their backs to the walls, taking the brunt of the wind whistling through the cracks. Their role was to shield. They became a living wall for the whole family. No one ordered it, but everyone understood. It was an unspoken rule, a duty, a silent sacrifice. There was a distance to be kept, not too close to the fire, because the straw blankets and woolen clothes could catch fire. Not too far, because the cold would invade every breath. This distance was carefully managed, passed down from one generation to the next. A small mistake, a blanket placed too close, could turn the saving flame into a destructive one. Try to imagine the whole family, 10 people, lying in a circle around the hearth. In the middle are the small children, sheltered. On the outside are the strong young men, their backs to the cold. All are connected in one mass, like a closed circle of arms, holding each other through the endless winter. This arrangement wasn't just survival logic, it was also a measure of love and responsibility. The father, the older brother, lay on the edge, so the younger siblings, the elderly mother, could sleep peacefully. The mother, her eyes still bright in the darkness, watched over her child by the fire. Each position was an unspoken message. I will keep you safe. Some nights, as the fire weakened, the person on the outside would shiver, would stir. But they would still lie still, not daring to pull themselves closer. Because if they moved in, the person in the center would lose their warm spot. That silence, that patience, was love in its harshest form. And when dawn approached, when faint light have filtered through the animal hide, covering the doorway, the whole family would stir. The person on the outermost edge would usually wake up first, their back freezing, their lips purple. They would brush the straw from their clothes, give a weary smile, and then start the fire for a new day. They knew very well, if they couldn't maintain that circle, no one would survive the winter. The sleeping position, therefore, became a kind of survival map in the small room, a map no one wrote down, but everyone memorized in their hearts, where the children belonged, where the weak belonged, and where the shoulders that bore the wind had to be. If you close your eyes, you will hear the slow, even breathing of that entire circle of people. The fire in the center casts shadows, illuminating their weathered faces. In this seemingly simple arrangement, you will see something magical, that even in hardship, people still knew how to protect each other. And from that priority, the story unfolds further, not just within a single family, but spreading to the entire community, where sometimes even neighbors became part of the circle of survival. The medieval winter didn't just test individual households, it tested the entire village. And in that months-long cold, no family could survive alone. Imagine a small village, a few dozen thatched roofs huddled together. Smoke from the hearths rises, twisting into gray ribbons against a heavy leaden sky. Each house is like a lonely island in a sea of snow. But these islands were not separate. They were connected by invisible threads, the bonds of community. When a family's fire went out, they could knock on their neighbor's door. The neighbor wouldn't hesitate, would poke an iron rod into the ashes and bring out a glowing ember. The small coal, wrapped in an old cloth, was passed from one hand to another. Just one spark was enough to light up another house, to save a whole family from freezing to death. Food was shared in the same way. A spare bowl of stew, a piece of hard bread, a few leftover potatoes. All could travel from one house to another. Not because they were wealthy, not because they had a surplus, but because they understood. Today I help you, tomorrow I might be the one who needs you. Survival depended on that circle of exchange. At night, when the wind howled through the village, sometimes everyone would be awake. One family would call another to help clear the heavy snow from their thatched roof. Another would send someone over to watch the children while the parents had to go far to gather firewood. Another would sit and watch over a neighbor's house when their fire was dying down. These were small actions, but in winter, they became lifelines. Try to imagine yourself standing in the middle of that village. You hear the echo of a dog barking from one corner to another. You hear someone knocking on a door, whispering a request for some firewood, some ash. You hear the elderly praying in the small church, the bell tolling faintly in the cold mist. It all creates a somber but deeply connected picture. Even when death occurred, from hunger, cold, or illness, the whole village came together. They would dig a grave in the frozen ground. their hands trembling but not giving up. They cried little because tears froze quickly. Instead, they helped each other to carry on, helped each other rebuild a collapsed roof, relight a dead fire, share the last few sips of soup. Survival in that picture was no longer a personal matter. It was a community affair, a complex network where each person was a link in a chain. If one link broke, the whole chain could fall apart. But if everyone contributed a little, the whole village would have another spring to look forward to. If you listen very carefully, you will hear that rhythm, the rhythm of footsteps on snow as people visit each other, the rhythm of flickering fires in each house, connecting the whole village like small lamps, the rhythm of prayer, whispered, rising to the heavens. In the harsh cold of the Middle Ages, the village was not just a place to live. It was a great blanket, wrapping each family, connecting them into one. And within that, warmth spread, however fragile, still enough to keep people alive through the long winter nights. From the embrace of the village, the story leads us to another source of comfort, faith. Because when human strength was exhausted, they looked to the divine, praying for the fire not to die, for the winter to pass quickly, for life to be preserved in their trembling hands. When human strength waned, when firewood ran out, when warmth was just a thin thread stretched across the winter night, people looked up. In that small village stood a rough stone chapel, a low roof, a heavy wooden door, and a small bell, hanging silently under the eaves. Whenever the wind blew, the bell would chime softly, a sound as thin as smoke. It sounded distant, but it was enough to soothe the houses huddled in the mist. Faith was like a fourth blanket. It couldn't block the wind, but it warmed the human heart. In the afternoon, when the sky darkened earlier than usual, a few figures would drift through the mist. They carried candles, common tallow candles that produced black smoke and a pungent smell. In the church, the priest would light a rare beeswax candle, its flame a purer yellow, its light like a drop of honey. That candlelight fell on tired eyes, revealing the blue veins on a mother's chapped hands. The ritual began in silence. Then the prayers rose, low, slow, and steady. They called upon the saints as if calling distant relatives, hoping they would hear, hoping they would remember this small village. Praying for the fire not to go out, praying for the children to recover from their coughs, praying for the thatched roof to withstand the coming storm. In a corner of the church was a bowl of holy water. Each person dipped their fingers, touching their forehead, chest, and shoulders. The cold water on their skin was a reminder. Be calm. The long night will eventually pass. Back home, a mother would use the last of the holy water to sprinkle around the hearth, drawing an invisible circle in the air. Where the fire burned, where the straw bed lay, where the children slept. Every place was marked with hope. There were nights of vigil, not just watching the fire, but watching over the sick. A group of neighbors would sit around, their hands moving over rosary beads, their lips murmuring prayers. The soft clicking of the beads mixed with the crackling of the wood, creating a small, steady rhythm that soothed the fever, that soothed the anxiety in their chests. On the door, someone would draw a cross with charcoal. From the rafters, a bundle of dried herbs was hung, both to freshen the room and to ward off evil. In their pockets, small coins, pieces of cloth, simple amulets, keepsakes from a long-ago pilgrimage, were kept as carefully as a prayer. Faith could not drive away the wind, but it taught people to share warmth. It taught them how to wait. It taught them to believe that dawn would still come, however slow, however faint. Imagine, in the church, a choir's song rises, as thin as mist. No one sings loudly. The cold makes their throats raw, but each person contributes a little. A breath, a whisper, a clumsy verse. The entire hymn needs no melody, no instruments. It only needs them to be together. The holidays in the middle of winter were anchors for people to hold on to. Candlemas, the blessing of the livestock, the day of the candle procession through the village, the flickering flames dancing on the children's faces. Returning home, they would place a small candle by the hearth, believing that this shared light would make their home stronger against the wind. In the kitchens, rituals were performed quietly. A mother would make a quick sign of the cross over the stew pot, as if adding a grain of salt of faith. A father, before going to the cowshed, would place a hand on his child's forehead and whisper, "Go to sleep. Someone is on watch tonight." These were rituals not written in any book, not taught in any mass, but passed down through countless winters. When someone passed away, from cold, from hunger, from a cough that slid deep into the lungs, the village would gather again. Candles were lit around a wooden bench. Someone would read the name of the deceased, as if giving them a final presence among those who remained. There were tears. There was also silence. But amidst it all was the prayer, "Keep us safe through the night." And then life would quietly continue. The bell would ring at its set times, reminding everyone that the day still had a rhythm. The seasons still had an order, even if the blizzard blurred everything. Children learned short prayers as they learned to start a fire. Adults brought candles home from the church, keeping them like seeds of light hidden in their pockets. Faith, in the end, was not an answer. It was a way of holding hands. In the thick darkness, people did not walk alone. They walked in groups. They walked by the sound of a small bell. They walked by a shared candle. They walked with whispered prayers that passed through the thin smoke. If you close your eyes, you will see the whole village breathing in unison. From the church to each thatched roof, from the cold, wet hand in the holy water bowl to the charcoal mark on the door. A fragile but enduring network, covering the winter night like a veil over a cradle. And yet, beneath the blankets of fire, of people, of livestock, and of faith, there was still something everyone was afraid to name. Because winter didn't just test patience, it also tested the limits of lifespan, of flesh, of fate. When the church bell didn't just call people to prayer, but also called them to say goodbye. From the soft yellow light of the ritual, the story must venture into rougher territory. Wounds that would not heal, bodies that withered and failed too soon, and the constant presence of violence and death. Winter was not just cold, it was also cruel. And in that prolonged darkness, death was present, like an uninvited guest who would never leave. In the medieval countryside, human lifespan was short. Many people never saw their 40th birthday. A mild fever, an infected wound, a persistent cough, all could take a person away from the fireside forever. Death did not wait for old age. It knocked on any door at any time. A child stopped breathing in its sleep. A mother died of exhaustion after a winter childbirth. A father collapsed from overwork, a hand axe still in his hand. Try to imagine, in the morning the whole family wakes up around the fire. But one person no longer moves, no more faint mist of breath at their lips, no more stirring in the night, only silence, a small empty space, but enough for everyone to understand. Winter had won again. That death was not loud. It crept in, as silent as the wind whistling through a crack in the door. And like the wind, it left behind an emptiness that nothing could fill. But winter had another side, violence. When hunger drew near, people did not always maintain their compassion. Some villages shared with each other. But at other times, in desperation, people fought. They stole. A sack of grain, a bundle of firewood, a pot of stew, all could become a reason for knives and axes to be raised. In the darkness, besides the howling wind, there were the sounds of arguments. Besides the flickering fire, there was the glint of steel. And sometimes a short scream would tear through the night, leaving a silence heavier than the church bell. A child growing up in that environment learned to accept. They knew that a person could disappear at any time, from illness, from cold, or from a desperate neighbor's blade. They learned not to ask too many questions, just to breathe a little slower, to live one more day. If you listen, you will hear the wind outside, carrying not just the cold. It also carries the smell of iron, of blood, of sorrow. And in the mud and straw house, the eyes of those who remained grew more cautious, deeper, as if they had seen a winter that lasted longer than a lifetime. Yet even in the proximity of violence and early death, people remained resilient. They still lit the fire. They still shared sips of soup. They still whispered prayers, still lulled their children to sleep with voices hoarse from the smoke. They knew death could come at any moment, but they also knew that as long as they were alive, they had to hold hands. Winter, therefore, was not just a test of the cold. It was a test of humanity. On one side was the darkness, death, the hunger that made people fierce. On the other side were the embraces, the firelight, the prayers that kept people human. If you close your eyes, you will see that picture. The trembling firelight, illuminating gaunt faces. One figure, forever silent. An arm holding tight to a wheezing child. And outside, the wind still howls, like the cold laughter of winter. From that place of violence and early death, the story needs an exit. An exit not found in material things, not in a bowl of stew, but in memory and belief. It is the legacy of resilience, the ability to find hope in despair, the ability to leave for future generations, the tricks of survival, the embraces, the stories. Like a fire that never goes out, the winter eventually passed. The snow melted into streams that murmured on the thatched roofs. The fields, once white, revealed patches of brown earth again. The sun returned, pale but strong enough to call the seedlings to rise. The long nights, the smoke, and the frost became memories. But those memories did not disappear. They were distilled, quietly passed from one generation to the next. The earthen walls taught people how to patch holes. The chimneyless hearths taught them how to keep embers in the ash. The human lasagna embraces taught them how to warm each other with their own bodies. The animals huddled in the house taught them that every breath was precious. The wrapped scarves, the dirty layers of clothes, the moldy straw beds, the sealed cracks in the walls, all taught them one thing: Nothing is too small in the fight for survival. And above all, winter taught them about connection. No one could get through it alone. No single fire was enough to burn if it stood by itself. Only when embers were passed from hand to hand, only when stew was shared from house to house, only when prayers were said together, could the winter begin to retreat. You can sit here in the gentle darkness of your modern room and listen. The wind outside your window is now just a pleasant sound. The blanket you are under is not rough animal hide, but soft fabric. But somewhere in your slow breathing, the fragile breaths of those peasants from long ago still echo. They did not leave behind castles. They did not leave behind city walls. But they left us a blueprint for resilience, a reminder that, in poverty, people can still find creativity. In darkness, they can still find warmth. In despair, they can still find hope. If you close your eyes, you will see them. The nameless faces sitting around the fire, their eyes shining in the hazy smoke, their hands clasped together, trembling but not letting go. And the whisper echoes through the centuries. We survived, you will survive too. Tonight, as you let this story drift you into sleep, let those whispers stay with you. To see that, in their very weakness, humans found strength. In the biting cold, humans found warmth. And in the harshest of winters, humans left for the future a spring of survival, of love, and of hope. Take a slow, deep breath, and then exhale gently. Let your eyes close. Let sleep embrace you, as gently as the medieval peasants once embraced each other to get through a long night. And in your dreams, if you hear the crackle of a fire, the distant whistle of the wind, or the chime of a small bell in the mist, it is only a whisper from the past, reminding you that even in the darkest night, humans always find the light.